I just want to use this video to explain an example that we didn't have time to cover in class. And this example is about how to use the comparable firms to estimate the equity beta, hence the cost of equity, and hence the weighted average cost of capital. And this turns out to be a very important example. That's why I wanted to make this video, because these were important for first to solving your this week's assignments, and second, it will be very important for the case assignment too. So when we talk about comparable firms, they are basically the same firms in the same industry. But why the reason we use the comparable firms is because sometimes the cost of equity is not directly estimable for our division or project. Why it's not directly estimable? Because in class, remember we said in order to estimate the cost of equity, we need 3 inputs, right? Based on campaign, we need if we go back to that part, we need basically the RF, and we need that's the risk-free rate, and we need the beta, and we need the market risk premium. And the risk-free rate and market risk premium are relatively easy to get, but this beta may not be, because beta depends on whether we have the stock prices and hence the stock returns data available. But for those firms which are not publicly traded or traded firm, it has some projects, then the beta is not directly estimable. So we have to rely, that's the reason we have to rely on the comparable firms in order to figure out the beta of our own division or project of interest. And so that's the reason. And in class we talk about we can follow the 4 steps in order to do that. The first step is to find the comparable firms. And for the case, you do have to do that work. And the second step is to unlever to estimate the asset beta, or based on the above equation. So that's the equation here. So this is the equation for the asset beta and debt beta and equity beta. And because total asset equals total debt plus total equity, so asset could be taken as a portfolio of equity and debt. Hence, the portfolio beta, as we talked about in chapter 11 in the first session, portfolio beta is the weighted average of the beta for each asset within that portfolio. Right here it's the same. So beta asset equals the weight on the debt times the beta debt plus the weight on equity times the beta equity. So beta asset is also the unlevered beta, right? Because the reason we need these comparable firms is because the firms in the same industry, they share similar business risk. We said in class, because beta is a measure of the systematic risk, and there are further 2 components of the systematic risk. One is the business risk, which is determined from the nature of the operations of the firm. For example, if the firm is a pharmaceutical company, it might be very different from a retailer. Right? They have very different nature of their operations. So we further have the cyclicality of the revenue and the operating leverage, which determine the business risk. And firms in the same industry, they share similar business risk. But business risk is not only the type of systematic risk. We also have the financial risk due to debt. Right? The different firms, even they are in the same industry. So for the comparable firms, they are in the same industry as our division, as our project. But because they have different financial risk, due to that they have different debt capacity, debt value ratio, hence they also have different beta. That means we cannot directly use the equity beta, which most likely is the levered equity beta, because many of the comparable firms, they also have debt in their capital structure. So their their equity is also levered. So the equity beta is also levered equity beta. So we cannot directly use that number for our own division or our own project. We have to do some more work. And that's why this relationship here matters. Right? We first have to get the beta asset, beta 0, the unlevered beta, based on what we know, which is the beta equity and beta debt and their respective weights. And then we can bring this over, because now beta 0 or beta asset only depends on the business risk. And we said the business risk will be similar across different firms in the same industry. So we can bring this over to our own project or to our own division and make that to be the same. But we are not done yet, right? Because our own project or our own division also may have some debt. That debt level may be different from the comparable firm's debt level. So we have to do what's called relevering. The final step is to do relevering based on this asset beta, which we carried from the comparable firm, and now it's based on our own debt capacity, right? That may be different from the comparable firm's debt capacity. And that's actually the reason we have to do this unlevering and relevering. So with that in mind, let's go to this question. Conglomerate Products has 3 operating divisions: the food, electronics, and chemicals. And the CFO wants to estimate the cost of capital for each division to be used as an input in the capital budgeting process. And currently, Conglomerate is financed 40% by debt. So this refers to the overall debt level. So each division may have its own debt level, right, as it will be clear. The company's debt has a beta of 0.2. And in class, we said many times we could assume that because debt is much safer than equity, so many times we can actually assume that debt is risk-free. And if debt is risk-free, then beta of debt should be 0. But that's not the case here. We do have a beta of 0.2. Then the current interest rate is 7%, so this is a risk-free rate, and expected return on the market is 15%. And these 2 pieces of information are provided because we want to use CAPM, right? If we know beta, we can use CAPM to figure out the cost of equity or the cost of debt, right? We can use that to figure out both. Assume the debt capacity of the food. Remember in class we said that debt capacity means the target debt ratio. And in our real world analysis, we do want to use the target debt ratio rather than the current debt ratio. Right? The target ratio means the long term. In the long run, the firms will reach that ratio. So the debt capacity means that of the food, electronics, and chemicals division is 40%, 30%, and 60% respectively. Assume that corporate tax rate is 40%. So we have identified 3 competitors who share the same type of investments. So they are the comparable firms here to the 3 divisions of this conglomerate firm. So they are provided with the equity beta and debt value ratio. And the debt of these comparable firms are risk-free. So we can assume that the beta of this debt, of these comparable firms is 0. So the job here is to estimate the weighted average cost of capital for each of the 3 divisions. So once someone understands those 4 steps, then we can follow those 4 steps to figure out the final answer. First, to find out the comparable firms, and here it's not hard, right? It's directly provided. For the food division, obviously that's United Foods, and for the electronics division, that's General Electronics, and for the chemicals division, that's Associated Chemicals. So we have 3. For each of the divisions, we have 1 comparable firm, right? Altogether 3. So that's done. The second step is to do unlevering based on the comparable firms. So to do that, we need this equation. So let me write down this equation in my worksheet. So basically you have beta asset, and this could also be beta 0, right? We said it's unlevered. Beta 0 is unlevered beta equity beta. This is a weighted average. So it's B over B plus S times beta B plus S over B plus S times beta S. So now, because for the comparable firms, remember it's risk-free. The debt is risk-free. So this is 0, right? So the first term doesn't matter. Only the second term. So what about S over B plus S? We need, if we know B over B plus S, then this is just 1 minus of that. So for the comparable firm, we find out that information here. For the United Foods, it's 0.3. So this is going to be 0.7. And beta S, 0.8. So now, once we know that, beta 0 for the United Foods is simply 0.7, right? 0.7 times 0.8. So this gives me 0.56. So now, since this is unlevered beta and only depends on the business risk, so the business risk is similar between the United Foods and our food division. So we can use the same beta. But now remember, this is unlevered for our food division. So we carry that number over to our food division. So we know so far this step is called unlevered. What we want to do now is to relever, because we cannot directly use this as the beta of the equity, right? Because our food division does have debt, right? I mentioned that based on setup, debt capacity for the food division is 40%. It does have debt, but so far we just know the beta if there's no debt. But beta will change if there is debt, right? That's the business risk. The business risk matters for the beta, for the equity beta. So we do the relevering. How do we do the relevering? It's actually based on the same equation. But now, because we know beta 0, and we know this beta B and the debt binary ratio, equity binary ratio, we actually try to find out what's beta S. So we solve out beta S as a function of beta 0 and beta B. How do we do that? First we move this to the left hand side, okay? So beta 0 minus B over B plus S times beta B, that equals S over B plus S times beta S. And then we divide both sides by this, S over B plus S, and then move this to the left. So beta S equals beta 0 minus B over B plus S times beta B, and then over S over B plus S. So we know this beta 0, this is carry over for the food division, this is carry from the combo firm. And B over B plus S, now we need to use the debt capacity of the food division. We cannot use the debt capacity, debt ratio of the comparable firm. Right? The comparable firm is 30%, if I remember correctly. Yeah, 30%. But for the food division, it's different. The food division is 40%. So we have to use the 40% here. That's very, very important. And beta B is, if we go back, is 0.2. Right? So now we can use that beta S for the food equals, plug in numbers, 0.56 minus, this is 40% times 0.2 over, now 1 minus of 0.4, which becomes 0.6. And if you plug in these numbers into your calculator, you can figure out this to be 0.8. But if we want to, our ultimate job, go back to the question. Ultimate job is to figure out weighted average cost of capital, right? In order to do that, remember the formula for the weighted average cost of capital is what? WACC equals S over B plus S times RS plus B over B plus S. And then, because debt is interest deductible, so we multiply by 1 minus the tax rate, and then times RB. So look at this formula. What do we know? We know this S over B plus S, right? For the food division. We're trying to get the weighted average cost of capital for the food division. We know that. Same here. And we know this. Well, do we know this RS? We don't. And do we know this RB? We don't. Do we know tax rate? Yes. It's provided. 40%, right? So we just need to figure out what is RS and what is RB. And what we know is their beta, right? Beta S is 0.8 and beta B is 0.2. So now that's why we need CAMPAM. CAMPAM can translate beta into the term, into the cost of capital. All right, so RS, food, equals the risk-free rate RF plus beta food S times RM market risk premium. So do we know RF, the interest rate? Yes, 7%. And do we know RM? 15%. Right, so just directly plug in the numbers now. Plus 0.8 times 15% minus this is 7%. Okay, it's a bit messy, but I believe you will be able to follow. So this, you should just plug in this into your calculator. You can figure out the return is 13.4%. Same for the RB. RB, here it doesn't mention the divisions. So the company's debt has the beta of that. So we assume that each division share the same beta, right? There's no reason to believe otherwise. So this is just directly, or maybe just one more step for the first division. Then I can probably save some steps for the other two divisions. This is RM minus IF. Okay, so this is 7% plus 0.2 times 15% minus 7%. So this gives me 8.6%. So now I have every number which I need in order to calculate this WACC, RWACC. So weighted average cost of capital for the food division. Just plug in a number. Food division, remember the debt capacity is 40%. Hence the equity ratio is 60% times the RS 13.4% plus 0.4, right? This is 0.4 times 1 minus tax rate. Remember tax rate is 40%. So 1 minus 0.4 times RB 8.6%. Okay, so just plugging all these numbers into your calculator, you will be able to figure out this number, 10.10%. So that is the weighted average cost of capital for the food division, given its debt capacity and its business risk. And then the rest of the job is to do the same thing for the other two divisions, right? But now just plug in different sets of numbers. So let me just briefly do that. First, unlever. Remember, unlever. Unlever is based on the comparable firm. So for the second division is the electronics division. The comparable firm is the general electronics. So we use that information, and beta 0, remember that's B over B plus S. Beta B plus S over B plus S, beta S. And this is for the for what? For the general electronics. This is general electronics. And this is 0, remember? They are risk-free. So we just check the debt capacity, or debt value ratio of the general electronics is 0.2. Hence, the equity value ratio is 0.8 times the equity beta, 1.6. So this gives me 1.28. So now we bring this over. Bring this over to our own electronics division because they share the same business risk. And unlevered here just depends on the business risk. So our electronics division will be the same. The beta 0 of that division will be the same as this general electronics. So it's 1.28. And then we do the rate lever, right? Because this, we cannot directly use this. Our electronics division does have debt, and we now have to check this debt level. It's 30%. So we got to use the 30%. You cannot use the debt ratio of the comparable firm anymore. That's 20%. Now we have 30% of debt, right? Because financial risk, again, it's a determinant of beta. So how do you do that? Based on the same formula, solving out for beta S as a function of the other variables. So I just basically copy what I derived above. So I just copy there. It's right here, beta 0 minus this and over that. I just copy that. So it's gonna be beta 0. Now it's electronics minus B over B plus S times beta B. And this will be over S over B plus S. So B over B plus S, that's the debt capacity of the electronics division, that's 30%. Right, we just plug in that number. So beta 0, that's 1.28 minus 30% times 0.2 over 0.7, right? 1 minus 0.3. So then this gives me, just plug in those numbers into your calculator. This gives you 1.74. So again, I need to translate that into the return, right? So it's gonna be RS electronics using campaign equals risk-free rate 7% plus beta times market risk premium, right? So this gives me 20.94%. Just plug in this number into your calculators. I suggest you to verify all these numbers here. Just make sure you really understand and you're on the same page. And RB, what about RB? RB will be the same, right? Because we said the debt beta is assumed to be the same for all three divisions. So that also means RB will be the same. It's 8.6%. So now I can just plug in all these numbers into the weighted average cost of capital formula. This equals S over B plus S times RS in electronics now. And this also refers to the in electronics plus B over B plus S times 1 minus the tax rate, right? Times RB. RB is the same. So now every number is known. This is because debt capacity is set 30%. I still go back 30%. So equity ratio is 0.7. And then times this number we just found out. And then times 1 minus the tax rate is 40%. So then times 8.6%. So eventually we get to the weighted average cost of capital for the electronics division to be 16.21%. Double check that. And finally, the chemicals division. Still, we follow the four steps, right? First step actually is pretty easy. Find the comparable firm, and here that's associated chemicals. So and then we relever, try to get the beta 0. So beta 0 will be, because beta B is 0, so first term just doesn't matter. So S over B plus S times beta S. So in this case, the debt value ratio is 0.4, so equity value ratio will be 0.6. And times beta S, that's 1.2. So this gives me 0.72. And then because they are the comparable firm, so we assume this is the associated chemical, right? So we assume that our chemical division has the same beta 0 as the comparable firm because they are in the same industry, so their business risk is the same, 0.72. So now we need to relever, because even though they share the same business risk, but their financial risk, depending on their different debt level, will be different, right? For the comparable firm is 0.4, but for our own chemical division, it's 60%. So that's different. I need to figure out beta S for the chemical divisions. Copy the formula I derived above. So it's beta 0 chemical minus this B over B plus S, and this is for the chemical division, times beta B over S over B plus S. And this gives me 0.72 minus 60%, right? 0.60 times beta B is 0.2 over 1 minus that is 0.4. So this gives me 1.5. And then we try to find out the cost of capital for the chemical division based on the campaign model. So it's 7% plus 1.5 times 15% minus 7%. So this gives me 19%. So we have every number that's needed in order to figure out the weighted average cost of capital for the chemical division. Right, it's S over B plus S. Just write down one more step. RS, chemical, plus B over B plus S. And this is a 1 minus tax rate, and then multiplied by RB. So all these numbers are known. Now this is 0.4, remember, right? The debt capacity is 60%. So times 19% plus 60% times the tax rate, 40%, minus tax rate times 8.6%. So eventually, our weighted average cost of capital for the chemical division were turned out to be 10.70%. So I hope that by using this example, you will have a clearer idea about how to use the comparable firms to estimate the equity beta for our own division or our own project. And we basically follow the 4 steps. And you need that skill in order to solve for the case. So I hope this video will be helpful in that regard as well.